A new report has come out that indicates the Detroit Pistons are interested in trading for OG Anunoby. And while it might be seen as a positive or another one of these reports that we can look at and say, hey, this is good news. Bidding wars getting driven up. Masai Ujiri has more options to potentially bring back assets if we do decide to blow it up ahead of this year's trade deadline, or it seems like OG Anunoby could leave ahead of this year's free agency, especially a team like the Detroit Pistons who have a very sketchy history in terms of making good deals and good decisions for their own franchise. This could be a positive, but in reality, if we dive a bit deeper, unless Masai Ujiri can pull out some magic, and we'll dive into that scenario where that could potentially be the case in this video, this could actually be extremely bad for the Toronto Raptors. So let's just basically dive into it, because the report has come out and said that the Pistons are expected to be very active on the trade market, and OG Anunoby and Tobias Harris sit atop of their potential wish list. And this is coming from The Athletic. And again, positive. Teams interested in OG, half the league is interested in OG. The more demand there is on your sort of player, the more you can potentially get back. But in reality, the Pistons getting involved is very bad for the Toronto Raptors, because as we all know at this point, OG Anunoby is an unrestricted free agent come this off season. And for people that have been watching all the trade reports, speculation over the past couple of years, the one thing that is really just been in the back of Raptors fans' mind, it's a little bit sketchy about OG's future with the Toronto Raptors. Was a lot of stuff that was leaked ahead of last year's trade deadline this summer, and OG switching agents in order for this to get facilitated. But OG Anunoby basically wants a bigger role, whether it's in Toronto or whether it's elsewhere. So again, the Toronto Raptors, you might look at and say, hey, the Raptors are bad. We might be getting rid of Pascal Siakam. OG Anunoby, we could give him that role if we want to keep him. Obviously, he's going to command a massive contract. We understand that. And half the teams in the NBA that want to trade for him understand that. So again, we want to keep him, give him his money. That's been my stance. And then the real teams that have been linked to OG Anunoby's interests and stuff have been really only the Philadelphia 76ers that have a lot of cap space this offseason. And frankly, OG Anunoby doesn't have a world where he's going to be above the second option on the Philadelphia 76ers with Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid on that roster. So personally, even though there's the link of Nick Nurse and all that type of stuff, I don't see, unless the Toronto Raptors aren't willing to give him a big contract, I don't see OG Anunoby fleeing for Philadelphia next offseason, given the fact he wants a bigger role. He wants to establish himself as a guy that can handle more usage and take the route of a guy like Jeremy Grant, who was on a team like the Denver Nuggets where he was more, not necessarily a role piece, but not the tertiary option in the offense, to a guy that's the star player, the main guy, a bigger role. That's why he signed with CAA, his new agency, and they're going to facilitate to make that happen. But now with the Detroit Pistons, I just used the parallel of Jeremy Grant. They've done this before. They've given lucrative contracts to guys at the similar sort of positioning, similar time in their career as OG Anunoby, gave them significant contracts and let them have the opportunity, hey, be the vet on this team that gets all the shots, that gets all the opportunities, that can really be given the reins to the offense. And now Detroit Pistons are involved, and they have a heck of a lot of cap space this offseason. Detroit could have as much as $66 million in projected cap space with their current roster. So that number could be even bigger if the Pistons want to free up cap space with the trade this season or the summer. So the Detroit Pistons can offer OG Anunoby a bigger role and a heck of a lot of money. That is bad news, that they are interested in now acquiring the Toronto Raptors sort of top two-way wing. And maybe Scotty, you can debate that and that type of stuff. But that is bad news because, hey, they want to shake things up. And this is where we could get sliding the more positives. But the Pistons are on a desperate sort of stance right now. Cade Cunningham, the entire Pistons roster coaching staff has expressed frustrations in losing. They're on a currently, as of recording, I believe a 21-game losing streak. It has been a mess down there in Detroit, and they've felt the need to sort of turn things around and move to be a winning team over the past couple years. Now, Cade dealt with an injury last season. They brought in a few vets that could hopefully complement their young guys to take the leap and get into not contender status, but at least be in the playoff picture, and they have been horribly bad this season. So right now, the reason they're interested in making a trade and why they'd even consider trading for OG Anunoby is to say it. Tanking has not worked for us for the past decade. let's just try to get players as soon as we can, build a winning culture back up in Detroit because it has been a complete mess. So that's why they could trade for him at the deadline. But given the fact they're losing, given the fact that they're not like a contending piece here now at this point, they could just say, hey, one more year of tanking, things are getting messy, maybe someone gets injured, something along those lines, and then there's really no need for us to give up value, give up pieces to acquire OG Anunoby at this year's trade deadline. And frankly, they have all this money and the opportunity for OG. Again, Detroit, people roasted. I've never been there. I don't know it as a place, but Toronto probably is more higher desirable market. OG's been here for a long time, but they have the basketball aspect and the money aspect that maybe the Raptors could match monetarily, but couldn't match in terms of the opportunity and the role and that type of thing. And then also you have the previous success story of Jeremy Grant, who's now getting max contracts on the Portland Trailblazers. It's kind of what OG Anunoby wants. He's been a winning player over the course of his career. He's won a championship, all that type of stuff. So, I mean, I could see OG Anunoby looking at that Detroit option and saying, hey, this is a possibility for me. But that's why it's bad. That's why it's sketchy, because OG Anunoby, the Pistons could just say, hey, hold out, and then we'll give you this money in the offseason. And then also, if the Raptors are interested in trading him elsewhere, that Detroit option, teams will look at that and say, hey, he might just leave us to go to Detroit. So that's its whole own thing. And that's why I'm a little bit sketched. That's why I'm a little bit feeling a little sick when I see that report come out from the Pistons. Again, the Sixers are trying to pull him away from us. We talked about that briefly. Sixers Digest is covering that a lot. But, you know, the Detroit Pistons are the Detroit Pistons. And just last offseason, the Detroit Pistons turned down multiple first-round picks for Bojan Bogdanovic. Masai Ujiri, a guy that has historically been very capable of finessing teams in trades. It hasn't happened over the last little while. It really hasn't happened much over the 2020s. But my goodness, could we see a redemption arc? Could we see a moment of, resurgence? Because it's been a bit of a lull there for Masai Ujiri. He reached the mountaintops in 2019, 2020, even that COVID year, all that type of stuff. And it's been a little down here for Masai Ujiri overall. Scotty Barnes is a great draft pick, all that type of stuff. It hasn't been complete debauchery, like horrible sort of a couple seasons for Masai, but it hasn't been great. If we could go to the Detroit Pistons with no real leverage, a little bit, we could facilitate something and then make a trade like this happen. Jaden Ivey and then Azur Thompson coming back to the Toronto Raptors, or take two of their three, prospects that are currently just not being utilized right with the Detroit Pistons' recent early lottery picks. That could be really good, because there are some pieces on the Detroit Pistons that could be really nice. I mean, Azur Thompson obviously is a guy that, 10 points per game, 10 rebounds, 2 assists, 46% from the field. You look at the jump shot and you're like, okay, that's a little bit sketchy and all that type of stuff. But again, only 21 years old by the time the trade deadline comes around. A rookie, extremely athletic, a great slasher, a ton of potential as a piece that could come back. I mean, that's a piece that's as encouraging as a Keegan Murray, as a Benedict Mathurin, as all these guys that we've heard rumored over the past month or so here now at this point. And then you pair that alongside a guy in Jaden Ivey, who last season, 15 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists. Not the greatest shooting percentages by any means, but is an extremely, again, athletic guard that can facilitate, that can put up buckets in a hurry. He was getting some insane numbers in the last 2 months of last season. You might say, oh, that's garbage time and all that type of stuff. Well, right now, Monty Williams, again, it's changed game by game, especially over the past couple of weeks as they got more and more desperate, for a huge chunk of the season, was playing Killian Hayes over Jaden Ivey. Isaiah Livers has been getting more minutes than Azur Thompson. On a team like this, in the Detroit Pistons has lost 21 games straight. How did Monty Williams become the highest paid coach in the league? I don't really know. This isn't a Pistons podcast, but they're being underutilized. Their value is getting lower and lower based off the value that's there. Monty Williams has some sway in this organization, and clearly he hasn't been that sold on these younger players. Heck, even guys like James Wiseman and Isaiah Stewart, I can't even get their names correct, are getting minutes over Jalen Duren at times over the course of this season. And again, he's 13, 11. Again, all these guys are extremely young, only 20 years old, 21 years old, 22 years old. If we could get 2 of these players from the Detroit Pistons, from an OG Anunoby, who, again, it's a downgrade in the short term, 100%. But given his contract status, current situations, the similarity in terms of styles positioning to Scotty Barnes, if we could get 2 of Jaden Ivey, Thompson, or Duren, that's, you can't ask for more from Masai Ujiri. That's a great haul. That's 2 high potential lottery picks to restart sort of a retool, a rebuild, a reshake up. So, I don't know. Make it happen, Masai. Make it happen if a deal is to go down. Again, I'm still content if we keep OG Anunoby around, even if it's at a high price point. But if we can finesse the Detroit Pistons out of this, then I would be content. But let me know what you guys think about this news. You guys best take it as far. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. I'm signing out. Cheers.